Hi there Thunkers, and welcome to another video. In this video, we're going to demonstrate how to make a web API call in your Thunkable project. Let's get started. You can add a web API feature to your app by going to the Advanced Features section of your Blocks tab and clicking the plus sign next to the title Web API. Here you will see a menu that lets you set a URL, query parameters, a body, and headers. You can also set these properties with blocks during your app runtime. If you want to change the settings of your web API, find the web API and click the settings icon to bring this menu back up. We're going to be using the shortcode API, which takes a URL as a query parameter and returns a shortened version of this URL. Let's copy this sample URL into our web API so that we can test it out. This highlighted section shows that this URL includes a query parameter called URL, whose value is this example URL. Now let's get to designing our project's interface. First, I will drag in a label component, which will just display the name of this API that we're using. Then I will add a button whose text says shorten this URL. And then I will add another label and call this one result. This is where we'll print the result of our API call. In the blocks, we'll say that when our button is clicked, we will make our API call and we will print the result on our results label. As usual, we'll say that if there's an error, we will print the error. Otherwise, we will print the result. Let's test this out. So we click shorten this URL and we get this long JSON response. What we want to get is the property short link from the object result that's contained in this response. We can convert our JSON response to an object using the get object from JSON block. Then we can use the get property of object block to get the values we want from this response and show them in our project. Let's use the get property block to get the value of the result object and print it on our label. Because result is also an object, we're going to have to convert this object to JSON and then print this JSON in our label. And now if we test this project again, you can see that when we click shorten this URL, we get the content of that result object. Now we want to get the short link property of this object. In our blocks, we will narrow down the property we're getting by saying result.shortLink. This will return the property shortLink of the property result of our response. Since now we are retrieving a single piece of text, we no longer need this get JSON from object block. Let's test our app again. Now we can click shorten this URL and get a shortened URL as our response. However, this only returns the shortened URL of this example URL. Let's modify our project so that a user can type in a URL of their choosing and get a shortened URL. In the Design tab, we'll add a text input that the user can type into. We'll also modify our label, showing the API URL that we are using, as we are no longer using this full URL that includes an example. We will make the same change in the blocks. In our web API, we will remove the query parameter URL with this sample URL from our web API component's URL property. Now, when the button is clicked, we will set our web API query parameters to an object. This object will have the property URL, and this URL property will have the value of the text that the user has entered into the text input. So now I can test my project, type in a URL, and get a shortened URL. Let's add a button to allow the user to open this shortened URL to prove that our API worked. Back in the Design tab, let's add a button, make its text say open this URL, and we'll simply call it open URL. In the blocks, we'll say that when we click open URL, we'll use the open link block. The URL that we will open is the text HTTPS joined to our shortened URL. So now we can test out our project again. And now I'm going to type in the address of the variables page in the Thunkable docs, and I get my shortened link. And when I click Open URL, I'm brought to the very same page that I typed into my text input. This proves that our API call worked, and that demonstrates how to make a web API call with Thunkable. We hope you enjoyed this video. We'll include a link to this project and to the web API docs in the description below. Thank you so much for watching, and as ever, thanks for thunking.